Hello and good morning, good afternoon, perhaps even good evening. We are broadcasting live from Philadelphia and its surrounding environments. And we're delighted that you've all chosen to join us here for another in the continuing series of Wharton Executive Education Livecast. They are occurring every Tuesday, and by popular demand, we will now be adding Thursday morning sessions as well. So Tuesdays and Thursday mornings here in Philadelphia, 10 a.m. for Wharton Executive Education Livecast. My name is Jeff Klein, and I hope that I am known to some of you who have chosen to join us here today. I have taught at Wharton Executive Education for a long time in programs like creating and leading high-performing teams and the Leadership Edge. And for the last 5 years, I've been involved in the Advanced Management Program, our flagship executive program here at the Wharton School. My day job is that I am the executive director of the McNulty Leadership Program at Wharton. And it's in that capacity that I have gotten to know our presenter and my discussant here today, Sigal Barsade, who is one of our senior faculty members and one of the world's leading experts on emotions in the workplace. Today's talk will focus on emotional contagion, what it is, what you can do about it, and tips for leaders as we all navigate what are clearly uncertain times. So let me say a word or two about Sigal, and then we will get into today's program, and I'll give you a couple tips on how you can best participate as well. So Sigal Barsade, as I said, is a professor of management. She is a scientist, a scholar, a teacher, and a leader here at the Wharton School. I've known Sigal for over 15 years, and she is very involved at Wharton Executive Education, teaching in programs and running programs like High Potential Leaders, the Women's Executive Leadership Program, the Advanced Management Program, and many custom programs. Sigal is an award-winning researcher, an award-winning teacher, and also an award winner for curricular innovation. And I think that all shows how much she cares about linking research and education and giving leaders practical tips and advice that are based upon the science. So with that, I am delighted to welcome Sigal Barsade to today's discussion. Hi, Sigal.
Hi, Jeff. Thank you for the lovely introduction. I'm very glad to be here.
Super. And I'm happy to be here live from my basement. A couple things for our participants. We will take questions towards the end of today's discussion. We're scheduled to go for about 30 minutes. And you can post your questions using the Q&A function, which is on the right-hand side of your screen. If you have any questions, any technical questions, please feel free to use the moderator chat as well. And we will close with some closing words from our good friend and one of our great leaders here at Wharton Executive Education, Mike Malafakis, who is the Associate Vice Dean. Okay, with that, Sigal, you and I are about to talk about emotions. So I'm filled up with a little bit of excitement and a little bit of happiness around all that. So tell us, what is emotional contagion, Sigal?
So emotional contagion, which is the first part of what we're going to talk about today, is the phenomenon by which we catch emotions from one another. And it's not quite like a virus, but it is in the sense of, literally, if one person is feeling some way, another person catches it from them.
Got it. And how does that work exactly?
So the way that it works is it's a two-step process. First thing, it is largely unconscious and automatic. You can, in terms of both our sending and receiving, that doesn't mean you can't make it conscious. And actually, one of the points that I would make, both for leaders and frankly everyone, is that we should be more conscious about the emotions we're sending out there and the type of contagion we're creating. But the way the process works is the first step of the process is that we, just as humans, tend to mimic one another and our nonverbals. And in fact, there was a recent study showing that infants as young as 6 weeks mimic each other's, mimic their caretakers' affective expressions and nonverbal. So the first thing is we mimic. And then
Mm-hmm.
now if that's where it stopped, that would be a little odd because we would just all be walking around with like these expressions. But actually the second step is through a variety of physiological processes and also possibly mirror neurons, we actually start to feel the emotion. And actually emotional contagion is really the sort of the glue by which we interact with each other emotionally and transfer to each other emotionally. But the one thing that is really important to think about that sort of can be insidious about emotional contagion is that what the research shows is that we generally do not realize it is occurring. And so the reason that that can be problematic is that you might think the emotion is yours, and it is in the sense of you're feeling it, but it's not because, let's say, for example, right now in the pandemic, sure, there's a reason for everybody to have a certain baseline of anxiety, right? This is a scary time. Through emotional contagion, which means the breathless newscasters, your friends who are freaking out, reading the news for nonstop, you can get yourself more anxious than actually you really would feel otherwise, but you don't realize that it's from everybody else. Except for now you will because you've listened to this.
And Sigal, when I think about emotional contagion, does it affect everyone equally?
No, so it affects everyone, but not necessarily equally. And what we know is that first thing from a kind of personality perspective, there are people who are more susceptible to emotional contagion. So they're just, these are like, and there's actually a scale for this, and it's things like, the moods of other people I really pay attention to are one of my favorites. Commercials make me cry. I mean, it's that you're very attuned, but the whole idea behind contagion is attention, that you're paying attention to other people. And so if you're somebody who pays more attention, you might be more contagiable. The other thing we've also found is that the closer your emotions are to the type of emotion that you're surrounded by, the more likely it is that you will catch it. So if I'm a really positive person and I'm surrounded by other really positive people, I will be more likely to move up towards them, as if, let's say, I'm surrounded by a lot of really crabby people, then I will go down. I will, but just not as much.
All right. Well, I want to ask you next what role emotional contagion plays in day-to-day life, but day-to-day life is also so different right now. So let me ask a broader question. What role does emotional contagion play during a pandemic?
Great question. And we can, we can deal with both, but let me really start with the pandemic first. So one of the reasons that I've been really interested in going out and speaking with people is because actually emotional contagion can play a huge role in a pandemic. And if it's negative emotional contagion, it can play a particularly negative role. And actually, I want to turn to Governor Cuomo because he describes this really nicely. If we could run that clip.
Also, as this has gone on, we said we are fighting a war on two fronts. We're fighting the virus, and we're fighting fear. And they are two totally different situations that you have to deal with. In many ways, the fear is more dangerous than the virus. I started working on disasters, emergency situations when I was in my 30s. My first experience was Hurricane Andrew in Homestead, Florida. And I felt it. I saw on the ground what happens when people panic. And the panic and the fear is as dangerous or more dangerous than the hurricane. I've seen it in floods. I've seen it in fires. We now have misinformation and fear and panic, which is as contagious or more contagious than the virus. When you get that emotional, that fearful, you literally don't process information the same way.
And so I think what you can see from that video, I mean, he kind of hits it all. If you notice, he's like talking about literally you can feel it. And the idea that also the thing he says at the end, which is that there's a huge research literature that shows that the way we feel influences the way that we think. And so if you catch, for example, negative emotional contagion and fear from other people, then what happens is it literally influences your ability to think well. It erodes your decision making. And this is not just us as people, but unfortunately, it can also influence our leaders and it can influence policymakers. And so being aware of emotional contagion in a pandemic is really, really important, because not only does negative emotional contagion make you feel bad, but it can actually influence the way that business leaders and their employees and everyone make decisions.
Now, Sigal, one of the things that we've been talking about, and certainly the images conjured in my mind, are of these kind of high intensity emotions, like joy or fear or anger. Does emotional contagion, does it also happen with sort of lower intensity emotions? Can you transfer melancholy or be affected by that?
Absolutely. And in fact, in one of the studies that I did about emotional contagion, I had hypothesized that negative emotions would transfer more powerfully than positive emotions would, and that kind of high energy would. And interestingly, I found in that study that it was really the same. That it wasn't about whether an emotion was negative or positive. Obviously, if you're really calling attention to yourself and your higher energy, you might have a better shot at transferring emotion. But for example, we found one of the most powerful conditions was actually when people were being calm and serene, or what I called the California condition. And so this is all sorts of emotions absolutely can be transferred, which again is very important in a time of a pandemic. Your calmness and serenity can be transferred just as well.
Right. Well, and maybe a related question to that, as around the country and in many places in the world, we are socially isolating right now and not in direct interaction with as many people as we would have been before the pandemic. Does emotional contagion, does it occur over, video conferences, live casts?
Yeah.
Can it occur just by seeing someone but not being able to speak with them?
Absolutely. And so the way that emotions transfer is primarily nonverbal. So it's our facial expression, body language, vocal tone. But so clearly, if you're in a room with someone, which right now we're not doing a lot, it's going to be the most powerful. But there's absolutely evidence that it can transfer across video. It can transfer from the television. It can transfer through social media. There was actually a major study done with Facebook showing that there was contagion from the news feeds. So this is something that absolutely, and actually, by the way, there's also work showing that it can transfer via email even. So while it might not be as strong as if we're in the same room, it absolutely still transfers.
All right. So it's all around us then. We're constantly interacting with emotions, probably contaging others while being contaged ourselves.
We are walking mood inductors.
There's something new for the resume. So then how can we be more proactive? How can we be more deliberate and either, I assume, try to decrease negative emotional contagion or potentially increase positive emotional contagion for ourselves?
Yeah. So I'll start with, how do we reduce negative emotional contagion? So because again, we don't necessarily always want to get rid of contagion. And in fact, when it is positive, it can also, and sometimes, by the way, I want to be really clear. I'm right now giving sort of negative emotional contagion a bad rap, but I want to be really clear that it's not that negative emotions are not important. They can be critically important. And in fact, they can call people to action. Sometimes fear is what you need. It's just that over the long term, it isn't what you want to happen. So in terms of reducing negative emotional contagion, the first thing to do is, well, arguably, again, if this is something that's happening in the workplace, for example, you want to give the person, actually, you want to find out why they're negative. So the idea is not just to avoid all negative emotions. It's to understand why they're negative. But assuming you can't do anything about it, or it's a pandemic or something like that, the first thing is to try to sort of move your attention away from the negative emotions. And the other thing is, what we're doing right now is an important way to deal with negative emotional contagion, because knowledge is a form of inoculation. So now that everybody who's listening to this knows about it, there's research that automatic processes, if you make them visible, it can help to reduce them. So the fact that you now know about it already helps. So that's a situation for negative emotional contagion. For positive emotional contagion, the first thing I'd say is you really want to be thoughtful as a leader, or as anybody, even quite frankly at the family dinner table, about what you're putting out there. And so the first thing is, okay, what kind of emotion do I want to show? And I want to show an example of this with a recent leader in the pandemic who I think has done a beautiful job with this, which is Dr. Fauci. And he manages to give very hard news, but in a way that leaves us with hope. And so if we could run the Fauci tape.
Do you think it will be safe in November for voters to physically go to vote at the polls?
I hope so, Jake. I can't guarantee it. I believe that if we have a good, measured way of rolling into this steps towards normality, that we hope by the time we get to November that we'll be able to do it in a way which is the standard way. However, and I don't want to be the pessimistic person, there is always a possibility as we get into next fall and the beginning of early winter, that we could see a rebound. And hopefully, what we've gone through now and the capability that we have for much, much better testing capability, much, much better serosurveillance capability, and the ability to respond with countermeasures, with drugs that work, that it will be an entirely different ballgame. So number one, I hope we don't have a rebound that would make this very difficult as we get into November. But if we do, and there certainly is a possibility, I'm a realist, it certainly is a possibility, hopefully we'll be able to respond to that rebound in a much more effective way than what we're seeing now in January, February, March.
Okay, and so if you can hear there, manages to give not great news, but he does it in a way that also offers hope. And the thing about hope, I actually have a study with my colleagues on the influence of hope versus fear on kind of resilience in an entrepreneurial situation, and continuing on. And we find that both matter, but that hope trumps fear. And so in this time period, hope, the ability to contage hope is also so important.
So as a leader, Sigal, how can you intervene on behalf of a team or on behalf of an individual who you might be monitoring or feel concerned about?
So what I would say, so of course what's challenging right now is many workplaces are virtual, not every, by the way, and I would say that actually, frankly, the workplaces that are not virtual are some of the places you also really want to be monitoring for negative emotional contagion. For example, I just did a study with my colleague, Dr. Lee Fleischer, here in anesthesiology at Penn, and our other colleagues in his department. And we were looking at anesthesiologists and first-line responders and we were looking at their level of anxiety and what caused that anxiety. And what we found was that emotional culture, which are kind of the norms around what expressions you're showing, was a very powerful indicator of anxiety. And the way emotional culture gets transferred is actually through emotional contagion. And one of the things we also know about leadership is that charismatic leadership and transformational leadership and just normal leadership gets transferred through contagion. And so, and we literally in that study saw that providers who were lower in kind of their dispositional anxiety, when they were surrounded by cultures with high anxiety, they became more anxious. And so as a leader, what you want to do is, first thing, you want to really be paying attention to it and monitoring it. But one of the things we also know about culture in general is that a major source of culture is the leader. And so that you are actually role modeling as a leader for everybody else, not just verbally, but also emotionally through your demeanor. How are you walking in? So if you're there and you're and again, in normal times we're surrounded by our people, but as I mentioned, this can also happen virtually. And so when you're on these video calls, when you're calling people, be very conscious of the emotion that you're trying to bring out in people.
All right, we've had a lot of great questions that have come in from the audience, Sigal, and I want to start with a question Ronaldo has posed. He's asking if you could compare the role of the rational side and the emotional side, and should we think about that separately, or are those sides of ourselves interacting?
Thank you, Ronaldo. You actually asked the question that when I teach longer classes, it's one of the first things I say, so I'm so glad you brought this up. Our emotions and our cognitions are completely intertwined with one another. You can't actually even have one without the other. And so all of this is integrated, and not only is all of this integrated, but I would be remiss if I didn't mention that while, again, we've been talking about how like the negative effect of emotions on decision making, a lot of times people will say, keep your emotions out of this, stay rational. Well, actually, there's a huge body of literature that shows that being in a mildly positive mood makes us more analytic, be better in our decisions, and even do math better for everybody who's out there having to take tests in math. And so actually, our emotions and our cognitions are completely intertwined, and having more positive emotions can actually help our cognition.
Now, another question that I think is really related to the times that we're all experiencing here. We're not having the same kinds of social interactions that we had at work, and so a question has come in about how loneliness affects us in the workplace, and is there anything managers can do to help?
Yeah, so one of the concerns, so in general, yes, loneliness is a real problem in the workplace. And my colleague Hakan Ocelik and I have a study showing that lonelier employees actually don't perform as well. And there are, it's for two major reasons. First is they're not as committed to their organizations. But the second reason is one that might surprise you, which is that their colleagues find them to be less approachable. So even though people who are lonely, they so want, it's a person you pass by and everybody's going out to lunch and they're thinking inside, ask me, but they're looking like they're like not interested, and then they don't get asked, right? And the idea behind the really problematic piece about loneliness is that once you hit a certain level of loneliness, at the beginning, loneliness can be helpful because it can help you reach out. But once you've decided, that you're lonely, because of a variety of psychological factors, it actually only gets worse. You start to behave in ways that actually put people off, and you behave in ways that actually make it very hard for people to approach you. And because we know that loneliness has so many negative effects, both on the person themselves as well as actually at work, this is something you should really pay attention to. And the best way, what we found was that cultures of companionate love, which is not romantic love, but it is caring, affection, compassion, and tenderness among employees, really helped with loneliness. It helped to reduce the lesser affective commitment. Cultures of anger, as you might imagine, increased it. What also didn't help, we were curious to see if you put lonely people together, would that be better? Absolutely not. Like, don't take your two lonely employees and say, why don't you guys hang out? Because if they're lonely, they don't actually have the wherewithal to help each other. And so what you want to do is you want to create a more positive environment overall, but also as a leader, you want to listen well. You want to really show that, you're kind of there and paying attention to them. And you also really want to try to create a situation, actually shared work, but finding a way to really make that person shine within the workplace. And then the social stuff can follow. And you can try something a little more structured in the form of kind of mentorship and things like that.
Right. Sigal, are there, do you have any examples of how leaders have created positive emotional contagion situations to drive change?
Yeah, so I would say actually one of the examples that I thought was most interesting was both the positive and negative example, and it was a situation where a leader had this kind of wonderful team, everything was going well, and then the leader became a little bit disillusioned with the organization, was having their own issues. They resolved it in about a month or two, but then they turned around and they said to their chief of staff, they're like, why is everyone so crabby, right? And they realized that it was how they had been behaving. And what they said, though, is that it took a good couple of months to get it back, because it wasn't just you come into work and you're happy that one day, because, in their situation, they had actually lost trust and they had to rebuild that. But absolutely, when you see people coming in, and again, it's harder now because we're virtual, but it's literally, how are you walking in the morning? Are you saying hi to people? Do you know their names? Are you interacting? But you can do that same thing now verbally. And in fact, I would, virtually, I would argue that now is an even more important time to be checking in with your people, to be making sure you connect, to maybe have, that daily meeting that you don't do when you're all together. Don't make it an hour and a half long. People are already completely overwhelmed. But a quick daily check-in of 15 minutes just to see how everybody is doing can make a huge difference in creating positive emotional contagion.
Well, Sigal, you know that I could talk about this topic, and you did research for a few more hours, but we're starting to come up on the end of our.
That.
Well, after everyone says goodbye, you and I can just.
You guys, we can let them stay.
Okay. But I wanted to give you a chance just to make, any closing comments or offer some of your final thoughts here.
Right. So my main closing comment is that what I really, really hope that people take away from this session is the concept of emotional contagion. Because as I said to you, it's something that largely we are not aware of. And because of that, it can both influence us in ways that we don't want it to, and it is a lost opportunity to be able to influence ourselves and others in ways that we do want them to. And so remembering that emotional contagion exists and checking in and saying, am I really feeling this way because I want to, or because it's somebody else? And am I presenting myself in the world the way that I would like to?
That's great. Thank you, Sigal. We really appreciate your time today. There will be 2 updated nano tools that will be available directly after this broadcast that deal with the topics of emotional contagion and loneliness at work. So we would encourage you to access those. They contain the kinds of practical tips that Sigal was kind enough to share with us here today. With that, I will also say goodbye. We hope to see you very soon back on the campus of the University of Pennsylvania and the Wharton School. And let me turn it over to our Associate Vice Dean at Wharton Executive Education, Mike Malafakis.
Jeff and Sigal, thank you so much for an amazing session. And what's really amazing, Sigal, is to see how important this is now that we're living in the virtual world and it's all about virtual connectivity, yet emotional contagion is as important, or maybe even more so, than it is when we were working together. Looking forward to all of us getting back to working together in a physical sense as well. And I would like to thank you all once again from joining us from around the world in our 7th Wharton Ready Livecast, where we bring you great thought leaders from Wharton. And you'll notice that this week we're actually offering 2. We have so much to share. And Thursday, there's the next session, which will be Professor Michael Roberts, who is speaking on navigating the current crisis. It's basically jumping into something that Wharton is very well known for, finance, but from a financial aspect, navigating the current crisis. That will be Thursday at 10 a.m. Eastern, 1400 GMT, and it's going to be a 45-minute session. So this week, next week, we're going to actually have 2 livecast series, and we look forward to seeing you at both of those. Follow us on social media, stay connected, stay strong, and use the nano tools. Thank you.